Today, I'm gonna do something a bit different with this channel. I've changed it slightly to a movie rant. Now, I have done a movie rant before, but this is gonna be the first of a series. The quarantine is happening, and so I have plenty of time to do something that I have not been doing nearly enough of, and that is watch movies. And one thing I have been doing is I have started watching all the Bond movies. So what I'm going to do I'm going to say 5 videos, is I'm going to just say something about each of them. I'm watching them in order, and I'm going to be commenting on each one, and analysing them in groups. Maybe commenting on the group as actor, or time period, or whatever is relevant to that grouping. So the first 5 is simple, because they are all Sean Connery, and they are the first 5 movies produced by Albert Broccoli, so they have a lot of threads throughout them. So, gonna start with number 1, Dr. No. This movie is good. One of the key things about this movie is that it was made on a pretty limited budget. This explains the casting of pretty unknown Sean Connery in the title role. It explains the limit of some of the sets, although I'll come back to the sets in a minute. Made on a budget of just $1.1 million, grossing over $16 million, so a huge profit. No wonder it went on to make so many movies later, the amount of money that this would make. Now, Dr. No is good, but that's because it's not following the Bond tropes. It's creating some of them. It's not creating all of them. There is no Q here. There are no real gadgets. The closest thing you get to a gadget scene is when he swaps his Beretta for the infamous Walther PPK, which is a cool scene. It's an explanation for the gun. I like it. But the key element for this movie, the thing that makes it, is a little scene that has become one of the most iconic in film history. And it's the introduction of James Bond.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Connery does it so cool, but it's not got that arrogance that you see in later films. It's got elements that are just really cool for the time and continued to be cool, partly creating this idea of coolness. He's not necessarily cut of some upper class cloth. He's still got that slight Scottish accent that peeks through, and there are moments where he's playing down the suaveness of James Bond, but here is one where it comes across really, really well. Now, key to a James Bond film is, of course, the villain, and Dr. No is a good villain. He's so unemotional, but in such a stoic way. Whereas James Bond is unemotional because nothing phases him, Dr. No is unemotional in that creepy way. And I think it's best that they started with Dr. No and his lack of hands to just get across that juxtaposition between Bond's coolness and the unemotion of megalomania. I think he's a cool villain. The hands don't look great. The special effects are not great. The green screen in 60s movies is just jarring to a modern audience. But the story goes wrong, and I came back to Dr. No for the first time in a while, and I was surprised that in the first movie they ran with the Spectre thing. One of my criticisms of the recent movies is how they're trying to force in the Spectre element, and I had forgotten that they did that in the original ones. The Spectre is there throughout Dr. No. Dr. No is a member of Spectre. But the film looks good. The sets are amazing. That beach, Ursula Andress, the cinematography of her coming out. Again, iconic images. Cinematography of the opening shot, pre-title shot down the barrel of the gun. Really setting some iconic milestones here. And another thing that really surprised me about how much I loved it in the earlier films is the theme. I remember in the 90s they tried to jazz it up with a bit more guitar, but here that sharp horn sound for the beat is so good. And in this movie, Dr. No, James Bond is not even that creepy. He's enough creepy for you to think, okay, I don't want to be like James Bond, but he's cool enough for you to think, I'll watch movies about him. So for me, Dr. No is a good movie, and I'm glad I watched it again, and I recommend. Next was From Russia with Love, which was released just a year later. Dr. No was 62, From Russia with Love was 63. And it keeps some of those key elements. Same director, Terence Young, who does pretty well, considering outside of Bond, he wasn't really that highly regarded. Connery comes back. He doesn't amp it up too much. He keeps that relatively reserved coolness. It's cool, and it's a convincing cool, especially fitting with the plot, because the plot of this one is they deliberately walk into a trap. So there's that arrogance of thinking I'm walking into a trap and it's worth it. But the key thing to this is the tone throughout it, because you think about a Daniel Craig or Pierce Brosnan Bond film, it's huge action sequences, and this one does not have that. It's much more of a spy film. This is why a lot of people prefer this one to any other, because it's a proper spy film. It gave me a sense of Hitchcock, especially with the scenes on the train. It's a real Agatha Christie mystery going on. Not so much who did it, but how will Bond get out of it. And that's helped by Robert Shaw's villain. He's only the henchman, really, but he does so well. I mean, it's Robert Shaw. He's great. And he does so well. He even does quite convincingly tell him the entire plan.
Oh, I don't mind talking. I get a kick out of watching the great James Bond find out what a bloody fool he's been making of himself.
It's a well-made scene, much better than some of the others. And then there are other scenes that remind me of classic Hitchcock films like Notorious. For 1 hour and 55 minutes, it's a well-paced movie as well. It does really well. This is another one I highly recommend, and Bond is not that creepy again. There's still elements where you think, come on, a little bit, but if you're willing to allow that 60s sensibility to come through, then okay. One criticism, which is unfair really, because it's part of one of the best things about it. Lotte Lenya's number 2 is a great element to this movie, but her blade in her shoe is such a lame gadget that has rightfully been lampooned many times since. It's a kind of a disappointing lull ending to what is actually a really good movie. I was surprised when it finished on that note. Next is one of the most highly regarded Bond movies ever, number 3, Goldfinger. Again, made the following year, 1964. So this is churning them out. This time new director Guy Hamilton, working with a budget of $3 million as opposed to the $1 million for Dr. No. And that goes into a lot of the locations. The set building for Fort Knox is really impressive. They really go big with it, which works well. The number of extras needed for all of the poisoned soldiers in the finale is great. And Goldfinger's luxurious lifestyle, it's really well made as well. The set for his lair, almost with all the moving parts, is really good. Bond here starts to get creepy, though. This is the famous scenes with Pussy Galore, where he forces himself on her, and that turns her head and makes her good. It's creepy and lame. The special effects are not perfect here, especially right at the end, with Goldfinger being sucked out of the plane window. But I'll forgive that element of Goldfinger, because he is so good. He is such a great villain. Played so well by Gert Frobe. The slight gurning in the opening scene and the unconvincing death bookend a really top performance. And I am absolutely convinced that in the Daniel Craig movies, if they had brought Goldfinger back, it would have been Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think they wanted to. I think they would have cast him to do it. If you look at how he played a couple of roles, like A Most Wanted Man, he basically played Goldfinger, the spy, as opposed to Goldfinger, the baddie in that movie. I think he would have been really good. When he played the villain in Mission Impossible 3, I thought, this is, again, going for Goldfinger, so that would have been great. I think they ditched Goldfinger as an idea when Philip Seymour Hoffman died. Again, the plot is good. It hints at Spectre and plays with those ideas, but doesn't labour the point too much. It's its own adventure, and the plot goes pretty well. If Bond wasn't quite so creepy in this one, I think it would be hard to argue it's not the best. There are these elements that pull it back, like special effects as well, but it is right up there with the best. Next was Thunderball in 1965. So there are 4 movies in 4 years here, and we've gone back to Terence Young directing, and it's again following this trend, getting slightly creepier and slightly more heavy with the cliches, like the quips. If you think about Goldfinger, starts with him electrocuting someone in the bath and saying, "Shocking." That's actually an allusion to the way he kills Oddjob at the end by electrocuting him. So it fits into the narrative, whereas you think things like Thunderball, the quips are just quips and nothing more. Like when he is dancing and uses the girl as a human shield, then puts her down and says, "Do you mind if my friend sits here? She's just dead." It's not even a clever line, it's just right there. And to be fair, Connery does the eyes to show he knows what he's just said. The camera knows, the film knows what it's doing with that one, but it's just a little bit cheap. The villain in this one, not nearly as memorable. Coming straight out of Goldfinger, you had to do something. So what they did, they got someone boring, gave him an eye patch, and some sharks. You remember the sharks more than you do the villain. The villain's death is underwhelming as well, though you do get an explosion. But the focus of the film really is the underwater stuff, which in the 60s you think of Jacques Cousteau exploration. It's really beautiful in a lot of ways. The battle underwater, it goes on and on and on. It's long, it feels long to a modern audience, but it's pretty good, and it explains the 9 million budget that this one had. But it still went on to make 63 million, so you understand. They've invested and it was worth it. The gadgets are a bit lame. I mean, the jetpack at the beginning just looks awful now, but it's pretty cool, I guess. I guess it's the first really dumb gadget we get from Bond. But Bond is getting really creepy now. He's going even further in the really inappropriate behaviour towards the female characters, and it's difficult to watch. So when you think about how Thunderball doesn't have some of the other elements, it's the first one that's really lost a lot of its positives as time has gone. It doesn't stand up next to the other 3. And then the 5th one, You Only Live Twice. This one, it's got so many really awful moments in it. I mean, if you think about it as part of the Bond canon, it's so vital because it's where we first see Blofeld, who's been hinted at throughout the previous movies. We've seen him from the chest down, we've seen the cat, we've seen the suit, and now we see the face. And it's Donald Pleasance, and it's iconic, but if you look at some of the other elements of the film, I mean, this story, it's written by Roald Dahl, but it's got none of the youthful wonder that I remember and associate with Roald Dahl, because it's so racist. It has the main plot is set in Japan, and so you have, at one point, Bond dresses up and has prosthetics on his eyes to make him look Japanese. It's really bad, and at the beginning, it starts, well, first there's the sex scene, which is not great, but then when he actually goes to Japan, you think, okay, this is just showing Japan like it would in, say, a 90s travel show. It's showing a few traditional things, but it's in an actual environment. There's the market, there's the sumo wrestling fight, which is fine, you know. Sumo wrestling is a thing. It is a thing that people like in Japan. You're going to show it. And so I was watching it and thinking, this is okay. And then about the time when the plot goes nuts, the racism goes nuts as well. It's really absurd. I like them playing with the space race, which is mentioned through a few other movies, but here It's ridiculous, which would be okay, but it's to a point that doesn't justify itself. And the racism, it really, really pulls away from enjoying the film. There's a whole section in the run-up to the final battle where you're supposed to be thinking, this is awesome, they're discovering a hidden layer in a volcano, which looks fantastic, but then it's just got this thread of racism and sexism from Bond to his fake wife, who of course falls in love with him. It's just absurd. And the superhuman sexual magnetism that he has to turn bad guys into good guys. It's played with a little bit because she then changes her mind, tries to kill him and fails, but it takes away a lot from the film. This is the movie where they introduce Blofeld properly, and they have the piranha tank, and they have the volcano layer, and yet it's difficult to enjoy this film.
Bond. James Bond.
The first 5 Bond films, starting from a modest budget and building to 10 times bigger, were a phenomenon from the beginning. The first movie, Dr. No, was a huge success, and MGM ran with it. They kept on increasing budgets, they added other elements, like the theme songs, and that linked into wider marketing, so that the third movie got a big premiere, and Connery could start demanding more money, and it was becoming part of the cultural identity of the 1960s. And a lot of this comes down to the quality in Dr. No. Not just Connery and his performance, which is great, but some of the other elements like the music and the opening titles. But the production design, it's well directed, well paced. It's a decent movie. Has its problems now, being over 50 years old, but it's still an enjoyable movie. In Dr. No, Bond isn't too cocky, he isn't too known, with being played by Sean Connery, so it just makes a good movie. No wonder it spawned sequels, especially when you look at how much money it made. 16 million on a 1 million budget. The sequels kept what worked. There's the charm of Bond. You go from him being a womanizer in Dr. No to him being a superhuman womanizer in You Only Live Twice. The locations are great, going from the Caribbean, Jamaica, Japanese islands. It's always looks great. Even the underwater stuff in Thunderball, it looks pretty good. They really, really pushed with what works best, amping up the villains, increasing the levels of disability and disfigurement. Dr. No's hands, Blofeld's scar. There's even a metal leg thrown in for a small character that Bond meets in You Only Live Twice. The action is amped up. You get these big, big explosions. I mean, Dr. No ends in a villain's lair blowing up, but compare that to some of the big battle fights, the underwater fight in Thunderball and the volcano mess in You Only Live Twice. And they introduced more things. The songs is a key one that really, really works. Shirley Bassey does 2 of these early ones really, really well. Tom Jones does Thunderball. How do you make a song out of the word Thunderball? They manage it. It's pretty good. They had Q and the gadgets, which is hinted at, and they really amp that up to knowingly absurd levels. But they kept at it, and because they had so much to work with, Fleming wrote so many novels and short stories, they could keep going as long as people were watching, and they're still going. The big issue with these first 5, though, is where it pushes these elements of fun and action and winking at the audience. It takes away really a lot of the quality of the story and the character, and you see Bond in a tiny little helicopter being chased by real helicopters, and there's no tension there involved at all. There's tension in the helicopter chase where Bond is running around like Cary Grant in From Russia with Love, But then when you see it in You Only Live Twice, Sean Connery's not even trying. He's just like, I'll kill this one now. Oh, I'll kill this one now. It's not tense. You're just waiting to see how he blows them up. Even though Q has already explained all of the guns, you're going to go through them, go straight to the machine guns and go, oh, I forgot about the heat-seeking missiles. That's the level of tension in these scenes. The plots work in general. They're decent stories. They have the thread of Spectre throughout, which adds a element of danger to something like Thunderball, where it's kind of just a Caribbean island gangster, it feels, but the Spectre element really adds to it, so it's justifying the level of threat by stealing nuclear weapons. But there's still the individuality of the story. The idea of giving them numbers as well works for me in that way. It's adding a sense of connection to Spectre, but also like levels that you have to pass, and you cannot get anywhere until you've passed this level. I'm sure they weren't thinking of computer games at the time, but now it gives it that feel, and it's not number progression. You get that sense of having to complete a story to get to the next stage. The problem is that they had to keep on getting bigger, because this is what Hollywood does. You go bigger and bigger until you're overtaking the existing space race with absurd Spectre spaceships and volcano bases, and it's nonsense. You have armies of ninjas, because ninjas are cool, I guess. But none of that would really matter. You could do all of that if you focused on Bond as a character throughout this, and they don't. This is Connery's problem. He quit after 5, initially quit after 5, because he was bored of playing Bond. If he was going to do a boring play-by-numbers Bond movie, he wanted to get paid properly for it. He wanted $1 million plus a percentage of profits, and they were giving him $750,000 and a percentage of merchandising, which he deemed not enough for his time, considering how much he hated it, because he had had a big falling out with Albert Broccoli. He avoided him as much as he could, hid in his trailer whenever Broccoli was on the lot. So you got Harry Saltzman as the co-producer, who's equally important to Broccoli in these initial movies. He's trying to calm Connery down, convince him to stay, but they're already thinking of who will play him next. In the credits to You Only Live Twice, it says Bond will be back in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. They've already planned that, and Connery is not coming back. But if you look at Dr. No, there is a sense of progression there. There's no Q, but they do the swapping of the guns. This shows a flaw in Bond as a spy. He's learning he can't just stick with the things that he's clinging to. He has to develop his spy techniques. He has to listen to those who know more than him. You get hints of this on the island. Ursula Andress helps him on the island. He needs help in some of these moments, especially from the CIA. Felix is there to really help him out. And even in the interaction with Dr. No, which is a really cool scene, you can see emotion from Bond. There's a sense of dismissal, there's a sense of anger almost in Connery's performance, and it builds to a sense of desperation. That's why the finale is so good. The clock stops at 7 seconds, but there's a sense of desperation there. Similar with Goldfinger, the tension is throughout because of the interaction with Bond and Goldfinger, because Goldfinger has all of these different things he can bring out, one of which is his ruthlessness. The tension is there, and they play with that a little bit in showing Bond's spy colleagues as apparently useless, even though they're not in the end, but that's only thanks to Pussy Galore. Bond is vulnerable in these movies, and it's totally lost by the time you get to Thunderball. You think about the ocean scene, the final battle, all these people fighting underwater. It can't be an effective way to fight, but it's what they chose to do. And some of it looks really cool, but Bond then shows up in an underwater jetpack and moves much faster than everyone else and can move and react quicker and is always conveniently cutting people's oxygen supply. It's Bond just weaving through, absolutely no risk of him being shot. And then you get to the boat scene where the green screen is so bad that completely takes a modern audience out of it. Well, at least it did for me, because it's not only that the green screen is bad, but it repeats, it loops the green screen, so it goes past the same little island 3 times. And even just the sheer number of agents who are easily killed off in this. And again, in You Only Live Twice, the number of ninjas who show up just to die is crazy. It takes away any tension of the character because it turns into just him with an army behind him. Then there's Bond and his quips and one-liners.
Sergeant, make sure he doesn't get away.
If you think about Dr. No, they are played two characters. This is an interaction. This is a joke he makes to a porter. This is a joke he makes to someone he's about to kill, not to the dead body. In Goldfinger, it's about the interaction between him and Goldfinger. There are the lines after killing people. One of them is setting up for later. Shocking, positively shocking. That's an allusion to how he'll beat Oddjob. But then, when he beats Oddjob, what happened to Oddjob? It's not a good line. It's not a line that works for me. And he does the same when he kills Goldfinger. But even compared to the next couple of movies, these are so much worse. He throws the henchman into the piranha tank and says, Bon appetit. You can see the ridiculousness of the line on Connery's face when he says, she's just dead. This is for the audience only. It's not, there's no integration of this into the story at all. So by Thunderball and You Only Live Twice, the characters come stale, tiresome, and increasingly rapey. In just 5 movies, there's so much evidence. Until he literally coerces someone into sex through blackmail. The sex scenes, even with consenting women, really deteriorate in quality. Key example of that in one of the earlier ones, From Russia with Love. The sex scene sets up plot elements, characterization and relationship, especially the spy element. She knows all about him. He knows all about her. There's questions of trust here. And it's building a relationship based on the story and the plot and things that they need as characters. Not just Bond needs to bed her, she needs to get out of the way so she falls in love with him, but actually as part of the story that we're being told. There's a building of female characters throughout. Pussy Galore is cool, but her turning off screen because of Bond is a bit lame. Karen Dawes, Helga Brandt, starts off as one of the numbers inspector, but she's killed off to show the brutality of Blofeld. Akiko Wakabayashi, playing Aki, she has a lot of good moments, but then there's also the jealousy that comes in because, of course, no one's allowed to take Bond away from her. Mie Hama, playing Kissy Suzuki, she has some good moments, but still has that need for Bond, which you can get across with Moneypenny anyway. I quite like how Lois Maxwell plays Miss Moneypenny, because it's a sense of flirting rather than her falling over him. You don't need so much of it when you have Moneypenny at the beginning showing that. So after 5 movies, it really needed something to change it. It was starting to get stale. They were pushing the Spectre element, but that was just becoming ridiculous in a lot of ways. They'd added all these different elements. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. What they should have done is really gone for some of the earlier books with the tighter, better spy thrillers, but this is Hollywood. That is not what we do. This is about money and giving the people what they think the people want. And the money spoke. $43 million made for You Only Live Twice. They weren't going to change much, although with Connery no longer happy, they had to change the actor. So next time, in the next 5, I'll be looking at 3 different actors, starting with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So what I'm going to do is, as I'm going through, I'm going to be refining and reevaluating my top 3 Bond films. So far, I've only seen 5, so in order: Dr. No for the overall effect of the movie, Goldfinger for the villain, and From Russia with Love for Robert Shaw, the train scenes, and the real spy vibe to it. The worst one, You Only Live Twice, for mini helicopters and racism. If you want to hear my views on the next 5, please subscribe, click the notification button, please click a like if you took anything from this, and I'll see you next time.